What's this sculpture supposed to be?
Isn't it obvious? The lights are eyes.
Quit memeing on me.
Look at the eyes. Tilt your head a little.
Come on, don't burn me. It's an exploration of the relationship between Jungian archetypes and multimedia experiences. What's up, everyone? You got Mind Circus here with you, and welcome to another Mind Over Meta Open World Stories solo build. And today we're going to be taking a look at Celestial Ranger. But before we get started, if you are new to Guild Wars 2, new to the channel, or just haven't done so yet, I am currently farming likes and subscribes in an effort to build the channel, and would greatly appreciate it if you hook me up with one of those just below the video. Thank you in advance on that one. So, Celestial Ranger. Ranger is not always a fun or easy class to build for, and I'm really happy with this build, so I'm really stoked to share this with you guys. When I sat down a few weeks back and started working on this build, I had a pretty specific goal in mind, or a couple of specific goals actually. I wanted the usual heavy sustain open world goodness that I've been putting up in the channel for the last few months. I wanted it to keep pace with my friend's Condi Rev build in terms of real world damage and arc, and I wanted to use Longbow, because I think having an effective build out there that leverages the most common class and weapon combo is a good idea. I wanted to build that would be for players in open world who are running Ranger and are looking to take that next step into something maybe a little bit more effective than the usual play how you want kind of business, if you know what I'm talking about. And you'd think all this would be simple, but it really wasn't. I took a little bit of crap for my last Ranger video. There were some grumpy comments. One of them actually accused me of trying to make Longbow Rangers look bad. One of my friends who mains Longbow Ranger actually took particular issue with my comments about how I think the weapon builds bad habits, and sent me a pretty lengthy Discord message about how I was wrong. And I think what I took from all the blowback, and let's be clear, there wasn't a ton of blowback, you know, it was just a few comments here and there. But I did have one thing reinforced, that sometimes me with my 22 characters or my 23 characters, I kind of lose count sometimes. I kind of forget that often players in the MMOs end up identifying with the class and the spec that they play, and they form a connection that doesn't just say, I play Longbow Ranger, but I am a Longbow Ranger. And if I go ahead after that and I say, you know, many Longbow Rangers do X or Y, people can kind of take that kind of things as an affront, and absolutely, you know, not my intent at any given point. So I don't always consider this. I haven't mained a class in this game for years now. In the past 3 days alone, you know, I've meaningfully played 5 different classes. So let me reiterate a couple of things before I go on. First off, and I said this in my last video, there's no right and wrong way to play Guild Wars 2. You know, there's what you enjoy. And if what you enjoy is roaming around in open world with a mix of Rampagers and Valkyries gear with a juvenile polar bear tanking aggro for you, then do it. Live it. Love it. Just do it. You get no argument from me as long as you know you're having fun. And You know, let me also say, all Longbow Rangers are not terrible players. Longbow itself has some pretty sweet damage builds when it comes to instanced PvE, like fractals or strikes. It can be really strong and competitive, like world versus world. I can't count how many times I've been ripped a new one by a Sikkim Ranger. So, we're going to talk a fair bit more about the Longbow and the build, and particularly in the gameplay sections of this video. I really wanted to put this out there, though, before I got started. I also want to be clear before we go on, we won't be camping Longbow on this build. We'll go over this in the gameplay section, but our use of Longbow is going to be primarily as a secondary weapon. Your real damage is going to come from your other weapon set. I get the class fantasy. I get the desire to use it, and for those reasons, I've attempted to work it into the build in a meaningful and fun way. And you know what? I think I was successful. So, with all that out of the way, I am super happy with this build. I've worked a fair bit on it, spent a lot of time to get it right, and to get it to a place where I felt it was decent, and I was happy to share it with you. And really, that's where we're at this point. So let's take a look and see how it does. Our basic AoE checks were really strong. The Celestial gear gives us the toughness that we need to mitigate things like the spike damage from pocket raptors, and we do have access to a really strong AoE in the offhand axe. Ranger also has a few different options in terms of stability if we need it, so things like Lake Doric Centaurs were really easy. Basic overworld champions, total cake. This build provides enough self-sustain that things like the usual suspects, the Broodmother and Frostgorge Sound, the Crichton Bandit bounties, even the Giant and Cursed Shore, super doable without having to worry about the occasional blown cooldown or missed dodge. I really enjoyed this build on these types of encounters. Hot hero points were also cake, not a problem. Not too much to say here again. The sustain and damage were both where they needed to be in order to get through these ones that I tried to solo. I did Mordrum Flower, Troll Runestone, Pile of Guano, Security Golem. They were all really easy on this build. So some of the harder open world stuff is where I started to feel a few of the weaknesses in the build, particularly the lack of CC for the way that I had it primarily set up. But if there's one thing that's great about Ranger, it has a ton of like selfish options, I want to call them. So if you're willing to give up a little damage here and there, things like stability and CC are really easy to find in the Ranger kit. So totally there. Crucible of Consecration was okay, much better when I swapped a few utilities and got it right. And finally, Desert Bounties. On a Longbow Ranger, yep, we got it. But let's be clear. Like I said earlier, we're not going to be camping the Longbow. Our best damage is going to come from swapping into it, using its relevant powers, and then spending most of our time in Dagger Axe for the big damage. But I did handle my two usual suspects on this build without any issue, so did a really fine job, and I was really happy with it at that point. All in all, totally solid build, and after a bit of tweaking, I became really happy with it. So let's get into what I think of the strengths and weaknesses on this one. The number one strength is the sustain. The sustain on this build is really surprisingly strong. And in fact, the sustain that I put together on this build actually outdid Condi Rev at a few points in the Celestial gear. So I was really stoked on this one. Handles a lot of pressure, comes back really quickly. We've got two really significant sources of consistent self-sustain, and we're going to be using We Heal as One as our heal, which is a really strong heal. I'm a big fan. Number two was the damage, and you know what? An appreciable amount of damage on Longbow Ranger without having to go all in on all the traits and etc. was really surprising. You know, and, like I say, and I'll go back, you know, we'll be using Axe a lot for our big hits. We'll be using Dagger a lot for our, you know, our day-to-day, our meat and potatoes hits. But really good damage. You know, it does kind of cap out at higher levels. maybe a little, it caps out, you know, a little sooner than other builds might that I've put up on the channel, but the damage is absolutely there. Things are not becoming a battle of attrition. And like I say, if you're handling a desert bounty within the, you know, within the timer, etc., then you're doing okay if you're doing that alone. And the number 3 strength is also its number 1 weakness. In terms of the strength, it's Longbow. A lot of people like using Longbow, and this really was one of the big goals of the build for me to get a appreciable amount of damage out of Longbow. And really, that's kind of it. We can take that Longbow, we can use a decent amount of, or do a decent amount of damage with it, work it into our kit, keep our class fantasy, which is a big reason why people like running Longbow Ranger, and at the same time as being able to do a meaningful job in open world, which many Longbow builds kind of struggle with. But its number 1 weakness is also that it's using Longbow. Now, Longbow is... And we'll spend a little bit more time talking about this in the gameplay section. It's got a lot of utility on it. It doesn't have as much damage as other weapons do, and in order to get that damage that we do see, you know, particularly in things like burst builds that are being used in T4 fractals or raids, etc. In order to get that, we kind of have to go all in on damage, and you know, if we're not doing that, then the Longbow becomes, you know, if you read the title of the video, this was due to a conversation between Cattywampus and I, where I was like, you know, how do I talk about this in this video? And she joked that, you know, just tell them it's like dollar store lighting, but it isn't, and you know, and it's got its strengths and weaknesses, and we'll talk about it a lot more in the gameplay section. I won't get off on too much of a tangent at this point. Number 2 weakness on this build, as I will present it to you, is Breakbar Hate. Now, this is not to say that Ranger does not have a lot of really great utilities to provide Breakbar Hate, but the way I've got it set up, you will run into some problems with Breakbar Hate, and it's kind of the thing that if you are in scenarios where you're going to need a lot of it, you're going to want to swap a thing or two out. So it's not a killer. It's not that there's a problem with Ranger. It's how I've set the build up, and the Breakbar Hate, you know, while not being awful, definitely isn't as strong as some of the other builds that I put up on the channel. And the last, as you have heard me say in a number of points, it is Celestial. It is therefore expensive. Now, I've talked a bit about this before on the channel, but let me touch on it again. Stat selectable armor boxes are your number 1 biggest, best friend when it comes to things like Celestial or Trailblazers or some of the other more expensive stat sets like Minstrels, etc. But I do want to put one thing out there, and that there was a change recently in that boost gear. So if you are using a level 80 boost, actually gives you Celestial gear now. So it'll give you a set of exotic Celestial gear, which is absolutely fantastic. It's second best in slot gear, and you know, I can't applaud ArenaNet enough for the choice they made with that. But going back to what I said, you know, if you don't have that boost gear, you're going to want to leverage any kind of sources of stat selectable armor that you may have, and that's really important to kind of point out. You know, let me again reiterate, if you are newer to the game and you want that Celestial gear, do not go ahead and start buying it off the trading post. The premium that you'll pay is absolutely ridiculous. I will link down in the description below. I have a couple of videos. One is about stat selectable trinkets, and one is about stat selectable armor boxes. I'm going to recommend that, you know, if you're newer to the game and you don't have any sources of these things, definitely go ahead and check these videos out and just make sure that you're acquainted with some of the more reasonable ways to kind of get the stat set without going ahead and paying ridiculous amounts on the TP. So, all that said, hey, let's go ahead at this point and get into the build and the gear. And the number one thing we will take a look at is, of course, the gear. The gear is pretty simple. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we are talking about 100% Celestial gear. I am running all Celestial in everything. All my weapons and armor are all set up as Celestial. Easy peasy. So in the armor, we are going to be running the superior runes of the Berserker. Now, the Berserker runes are offering us a very meaningful split between condition damage and power. I'm a big fan of these on builds where I already have the sustain kind of figured out, and really what I'm trying to do is take that damage to another level, and I'm in Celestial gear. As you can see on your screen, we're splitting our stats between condition damage and power. And on the 6, we're getting a flat 5% damage increase to both strike damage and to condition damage. These are really great runes on a Celestial build where we are looking to take that damage to another level. I'm a big fan of these. A little bit pricey, not awful. You know, they're certainly not like Torment runes. They're certainly not like Perplexity runes or anything like that. I believe they're about 2.5 gold a piece. So, you know, your mileage may vary on just how expensive you feel that is. But, you know, definitely take a look at it. I'm a big fan of these runes under this kind of situation where I have things like the boon duration worked out, and I have things like, you know, the sustain is all working in the build, and I'm really looking to just take that power to the next level on a Celestial build specifically. In the weapons, in the dagger, I'm going to be running a bursting sigil for another 5% damage increase on the condition damage, and I'm going to be running a sigil of strength in the axe. If you are at all familiar with the builds that I put up on the channel, I am a very big fan of running strength runes. There's a huge difference in the performance of any character with 25 stacks of might versus one that isn't getting any might. The damage increase is obviously very significant. I'm a very big believer in making sure that we're keeping that might up. And on a character that isn't generating a ton of might on its own, this character does generate a little bit. We'll take a look at that in the build section. You know, these strength runes are absolutely great. So if we go over into the Longbow, again, we're going to be running a strength sigil in here. We're also going to be running a superior sigil of force to up our strike damage by 5% when we are on the Longbow. And really, that is it. It's not too complicated. So let's take a couple of seconds, get over into the build. Now, in the build, we are going to be running Wilderness Survival. We are going to be running Beast Mastery. We are going to be running Soulbeast. Now, under Wilderness Survival, gain increased vitality. You and your pet gain expertise based on vitality. We're using Taste for Danger here. For those of you who may be unaware, the expertise statistic is condition duration. So you have a condition damage statistic, which talks about how much damage you're doing with your conditions. Expertise is the stat that actually controls how long the conditions that you place on people, like burning, like bleeding, like confusion, etc., etc. So, big fan of this one. We're going to be using refined toxins. While you are above the health threshold, your strikes inflict poison. While your pet's health is above the threshold, its strikes inflict poison. We're going to be dealing a lot of poison, and the reason that we'll be dealing a lot of poison will be coming in below here, particularly when we're talking about Soulbeast. So this is a nice trait in order to maximize our damage and sustain at the same time. You know, the other option really here is go with ambidexterity, gain condition damage, gain additional condition damage while wielding a torch or dagger. This is also a really nice trait that can bump your damage. So really I would pick between these. Your damage is going to be a little higher with ambidexterity. Your sustain is going to be a little bit higher with refined toxins due to our use of Predator's Cunning down here. And we'll get to that in a moment. And finally, we're going to be using Poison Master. When using a beast ability, your pet's next attack will inflict poison. Now, what we're talking about here is the F3 when we're in beast mode that will proc the extra poison. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes. Absolutely a nice skill to have. And again, get this all feed back into Predator's Cunning. Under Beast Mastery, we're going to be using Potent Ally, you and your pet. Grant Might to each other. Grant Might to the other when critically striking a foe. This is a bit of a Might generator. It's not bad. It's not going to cap us on Might. That's why we're using the Strength Sigils. Natural healing. Your pet recovers health at each interval. What this means, what natural healing means, is that when you are in beast mode, and we will absolutely be camping beast mode, let's be clear about that. We will spend all of our time in beast mode. This will give us some passive health regen. So this, in addition to what Predator's Cunning is doing down here, is where we're going to get just some incredible levels of sustain, particularly when we're running the Celestial gear, because this trait here will actually scale off our healing. Finally, we are going to be using honed axes. You and your pet gain ferocity, axe skills gain reduced recharge, and you gain additional ferocity while wielding an axe. Our biggest piece of damage is going to be axe 5. We'll take a look at this in the gameplay section. And reducing the cooldown on this is absolutely a fantastic thing that we can do. So big fan of this and the way that this plays into here, and that's kind of where we're going to get a lot of our damage with that. Going over here under Soulbeast, we will be using Live Fast. Using a beast ability grants you offensive boons. Again, this will start to stack our F3, and more specifically speaking, what this will do is give us Fury and Quickness. Now, Fury obviously is critical chance, but the quickness that we get off this is obviously a very big win. So I'm a big fan of Live Fast. Going down here under Soulbeast, we're running Predator's Cunning. If you saw my Condi Soulbeast build, you'll understand that Predator's Cunning is one of the more powerful self-sustain abilities in the game, as long as you're generating poison damage. So this gets back to why we're running Wilderness Survival, and why we're running Refined Toxins. It's going to play into Predator's Cunning. Predator's Cunning, if you are not really doubling down on the skill, doesn't provide a ton of sustain, but when we are putting it together with natural healing, these two together are absolutely fantastic and give us that level of sustain that is truly high. And, you know, let me just again reiterate that I believe that this build has a much higher sustain rate than many of the builds that I put up on the channel. So finally, we're going to be using Impressive Superiority. Deal increased strike damage to foes at a lower health percentage than you. Conditions you apply to foes at a lower health percentage than you last longer. So we get condition duration increase, we get a flat damage increase of 10%. This is a really powerful trait. I wouldn't really go with the other ones on this one. Leader of the Pack, I may take a couple of seconds and pop into this one if I'm running with other people. And what this will do is put our stances into a little bit more value. And we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds here. So Leader of the Pack is an option if you're running with more people. You know, if you're hanging out in 5 people groups, maybe learning to do some T1 fractals. I wouldn't take this build specifically past T2 fractals. If you're going to start to get serious about fractals, and you're running with a support character, where, you know, one of your friends is playing support, or one of the people that you're playing with is running support, you're going to want to go all in on the damage, and your build is going to look completely different. But if what you're doing is looking to kind of get your feet wet, you know, this is kind of training wheels kind of situation on the 5-person content, I would absolutely take a look at, you know, running Leader of the Pack under those circumstances. By no means should you ever take Eternal Bond. We'll just leave it at that. Going down to the way I have the bar set up here, I'm going to be running We Heal as One. This is going to be a bit of a boon generator. We have some other options here. Bear Stance is not great in PvE, so I really don't kind of recommend Bear Stance here. Troll Unguent is a very, very powerful heal. If you are needing a more powerful heal, I would probably go with that. And Healing Spring also is a very powerful one with a combo Feel of Water, but I really default back to We Heal as One, and that's just me personally. let's be clear that these next two, and we'll get into this in the gameplay section, Quickening Zephyr and Sikkim, are absolutely non-negotiable for this build. We definitely want to be using Quickening Zephyr. Quickening Zephyr is 8.5 seconds of quickness. It says it's a stun break here. I'll talk about that in a minute. You're not going to want to use this as a stun break, and we'll kind of deal with this in a few seconds. And Sikkim. Sikkim is just a flat, massive damage increase. Really, 25% extra damage is absolutely crazy. It really is. So, highly going to recommend that you be using Sikkim, and we'll just leave it at that. Again, we'll talk about in the gameplay section about why these two are so essential. Our third here, this is a little bit more open to your discretion. I'm using Vulture Stance because of poison, and as I mentioned earlier and kind of walked you guys through, the poison is absolutely huge in this build. Definitely a big value, but that said, if I'm needing a stun break, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put something else in here. Probably lightning reflexes. I may think about a couple of the other options like Dolyak Stance. Dolyak Stance is a really, really powerful stun break and 6 stacks of stability and a huge damage mitigation tool for 6 seconds. So Dolyak Stance is really good if you really need just a stun break. If you want a stun break and some vigor and a bit of Condi cleanse, lightning reflexes is really good. If I'm dealing with cases where a stun break isn't essential, I'm probably going to go with something like sharpening stones, or if I'm in I'll probably go with Viper's Nest as well. Viper's Nest, again, more poison, and as you know, the poison is actually a big value on this one. If I'm looking at a situation where I need a little bit of break bar hate, I'm probably going to put in Spike Trap, but those are your choices there. I'm going to stick with Vulture Stance under situations where I'm not needing a lot of stun break. Finally, let's talk about the Elite. You've got 3 really solid choices here. I've run all 3. All 3 have really great situational use. I currently have Entangle on here. Entangle, in addition to being some really good condition damage, is also some really incredible break bar hate. And we'll take a look at this when we get into the break bar hate section of the video. Break bar hate, obviously, really important. And if you need it, this is probably the best place to get it, is using Entangle. That said, if I'm in a situation where I want damage only, I'm going to be running one wolf pack. One wolf pack, your successful attacks will trigger a second strike while in this stance. If I'm running with other people, I'm absolutely going to put on leader of the pack and run one wolf pack. But absolutely big damage increase. And in the middle of those is the one I actually prefer out of the 3, and that's running Strength of the Pack. Strength of the Pack grants might to you, to your pet when you attack. That actually grants it to you. It's also 17.5 seconds of Fury. It's also 10 stacks of stability for 11.5 seconds. It's a ridiculous amount of stability in this game. And you know, if you watched any of my videos, you know I highly prize stability. I think stability is an underrated tool in open world. It's not something that we invest in very much, so you know, any kind of scenario where we're getting that is really good. So I like Strength of the Pack for the boons that it's generating. When we're using the Celestial gear and we're getting all that boon duration, this is a really good skill to use. That said, damage only, I'm going with one wolf pack. If I'm looking for CC and some Condi damage, I'm using Entangle. So really get used to flipping these 3 out on any given point. And that, my friends, is building gear. So let's go ahead at this point and get into some fashion. So fashion on this one, and I am proud to say, uses no gem store skins. These are all available in game at various points. I'm actually very happy with the look on this character. It was kind of carefully crafted for a while, and I'm just going to spin my character so my boga doesn't get in the way too much. Let's take a look at it. I'm using the Subterfuge hood. This is a simple piece of core equipment that you can get just about anywhere. I think the first time you start seeing it is around level, I want to say 20, but you know, I don't hold me to it on that. The Subterfuge hood, absolutely easily found. The Whisper's secret shoulder guard, which is just this one shoulder guard here with the daggers coming out of it. Big fan of this one. I've mentioned this before in other videos when I'm talking about fashion, that every order in the game, so the three, the Order of Whispers, the Vigil, and the Priory, all have a vendor. If your character is a member of one of those, is a member of that order, they can go in. They've actually got two vendors, one for weapon skins, one for armor. Some of the armor skins from these, particularly the Order of Whispers, are really, really nice armor skins, so highly recommend you get into those. We will be using the Heart of Coda. The Heart of Coda is found doing dungeons, and specifically it is found in the Honor of the Waves dungeon. Big fan of this piece. The thing about the Honor of the Waves dungeons, and we'll talk about this a little more in a couple of seconds, is they're hard to dye. They take dyes differently. The armor sets from this dungeon specifically take dyes a little differently. So it's one of those cases that if you're getting into these armor pieces, do keep in mind that they dye differently than other pieces. So, you know, if you're going to go with red, you're going to want a lot of different shades of red to kind of mix and match. And we'll go over this when I take a look at the dyes in a couple of seconds. Taking a look at our next one, we are using Buccaneer gloves. Core equipment there. Big fan of those. Just simple gloves. Quite like those. We're using the Rubicon leggings of the Berserker. You can correct me if I'm wrong on the Rubicon pieces, but I believe the only way to get the Rubicon armor right now is actually in the Legacy Armor reward tracks from World vs. World and SPVP. Really like the way that these kind of meshed with the rest of the look, but keep in mind, really, you could use a lot of different leggings under this one. And the Noble Boots. The Noble Boots, very common. I believe these are like a 50 or 60 level crafting bonus there that you get off. So you make the boots at that level, but you can easily purchase those, obviously, off the TP. Those Noble Boots are a really nice skin, though, and I'm quite a fan. Just kind of simple boots. I really just wanted to kind of keep with a few things. Another thing to take a look at is the Quiver I'm running. I don't usually put backpacks on my little fashion breaks here because I don't run a lot of backpacks, but in the case of this Quiver, it is one that we can actually craft. I will put a link down in the description to the Quiver and how to craft it. That skin is really kind of cool. It does take some T6 mats, I'm not going to front, so whether you think it's worth it or not is probably up to you. But having a back piece that works with a lot of different outfits, and you know, it's simple enough that it doesn't clash with anything, and having a quiver for characters that are running bow is something that you might want. And obviously this one is kind of nice because it doesn't like glow or, you know, cause retinal burn or whatever. Taking a look at the weapons here at this point, we are going to be running the Claw of Resolution. The Claw of Resolution, let us go ahead and just bring this out here for a couple of seconds. The Claw of Resolution is one of the precursors to the Claw of the Con-Ur. I'm a very big fan of this dagger skin. I actually run this precursor more than I actually run the legendary on many characters. Very big fan of that. And again, it's not a cheap weapon, but I'm a big fan of the skin. On the axe, we are going to be running, I believe these are the ones that are found in Thunderhead Peaks. These are the Dragon's Blood axe. You know, your mileage may vary on whether or not that's worth crafting or not, but as far as I'm concerned, finding a decently sized axe is kind of a special thing in this game. A lot of the axes I find are just way too large, so finding one that isn't, you know, comically huge is a big win for me. And you know, while I may not be a huge fan of the paint coming off that, I'm a very big fan of the skin itself. I think that's a really nice weapon. With the Longbow, we will be running the Shining Aureate Longbow. The Aureate weapons and the Shining Aureate weapons are found in, are gained when during the Lunar New Year Festival. Really nice weapons, and like I say, while I don't do a lot of, overdone special effects on my weapons, this one kind of suited the character, and I'm all good for a flaming bit here and there. So, big fan of that skin. You can get them without the flame effects, which is another bonus. It does kind of clip through the outfit, but I'm not too fussed about that. I don't think that's a huge deal. And that, my friends, is our fashion break. But before I let it go, somebody did mention in one of my recent videos that it would be nice if I touched on the dyes really quickly. So let's go ahead here. Thank you, Gail, for pointing out that the dyes are something we might want to touch on in our fashion breaks. With the dyes here, you're going to notice that I'm using a few different shades of red, and this gets back to what I was saying about the armor from the Honor of the Waves dungeons being a little bit different. So if you see here, I'm running, and let me just bring up my color picker here. I'm running Bloody Red on that, which is a very dark red, and then on the hat here, I'm running enameled whatever. And really, we're getting the same kind of color, values off that. And then if we look at the gloves, we're running enameled crimson, which is yet another one. So, it's one of those lessons that we may have to learn the hard way every once in a while, that having a lot of dyes in your arsenal when it comes to, playing Fashion Wars or playing Barbie, as I call it, so to speak, is one of the bigger favors you can do for yourself. So going over it all really quickly, we're using enameled here, and we're using silver satin for the trim on the hat, and we are using Bloody Red as well. On the shoulder guard, we're using Bloody Red, we're using Gold Fusion, we're using Dry Silver. I'm a big fan of Dry Silver as a dye. On the Heart of Coda here, we're using Bloody Red again, we're using Matriarch Brass, and we're using Ruin. Now, a kind of a good illustration of what I'm talking about these Honor of the Waves pieces is, on the trim here, we're using Matriarch Brass, but if we take a look at the knee pads, which are essentially giving us the same color values, I'm running Gold Fusion. Alright, so just keep that in mind. Enameled Crimson and Dry Silver on the gloves. We are using Shadow Red on the leggings. And we're using Bloody Red on the boots. Also on the leggings, Gold Fusion and Murky Gray. So there we have it. With all that out of the way, hey, let's go ahead over into the raid training area and see how this all comes together. And so at this point, we find ourselves in the raid training area to smack on a golem a little bit and take a look at our numbers. Before we do, let me take a couple of quick seconds because we are in a ranger. Let's take a look at the pets that I'm running with this one. I'm camping the Iboga. I'm camping the Iboga big time. I'm camping the Iboga because I am camping Soulbeast, and the Iboga is a deadly pet, which will give us a big increase to our condition damage when we come in here, okay? You will take a look at Primal Cry, which is going to give us some bleeding, a big bunch of vulnerability, and some fury and some quickness, the way we've got it traded. Really big value. I'm a big fan of Primal Cry. We're getting some confusion and torment off the F1. We are getting some confusion off the F2. I run the Iboga because it's a very offensive pet. You could run just about any pet on this build and get some decent value off it. You want to run that smoke scale, you know what, be my guest, but really I'm a big fan of the damage increase, and really we can just hit these three things off cooldown. And again, let's keep in mind that the fury and the quickness that we're getting off this are of pretty big value and lasting a very long time. So gonna recommend to you the Iboga. If I hop out of here really quick, you'll see I also have the Bristleback, which will do some bleeding. If you're going to want to, take a look at some of the other pets that I would recommend anything that is a deadly pet. But if you are in a situation where you need a little bit of control, some CC effects, I might take a look at the Juvenile Electric Wyvern. The Electric Wyvern has a really nice lightning field here with the headbutt that does some CC when we are in beast mode. Prelude Lash is a really big CC ability as well, so I'm a big fan of that. And then we're getting a little bit more off a little bit more CC, some knockback off Wing Buffet. So these are the ones that I'll run if I'm in a situation where I need CC, but generally speaking, I'm going to camp the Iboga. All right, so that's where we're at on that. Now, let's take a few minutes and let's talk about Longbow. Longbow is not my favorite weapon in the game, and it's not my favorite weapon in the game because you need to to get the full value off Longbow for it to be really good damage. You have to build your toon a very specific way, and this isn't the case with a lot of melee weapons. This is, however, balanced. This is not me complaining about it. This is the fact that the weapon does, has a huge range on it. We'll go ahead, we'll spawn our little training golem here before we do. Let's go ahead and let's put a CC bar on it. Okay. We'll add our Defiance bar, we'll add a weak one. All right, let's spawn that golem. So we've got a golem here at this point, and this is how people are generally playing Ranger. All right, they're hitting from range. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, and the way we've got the build set up, it's doing okay damage, but really you want to be doing a fair bit more than that. Now, the Longbow itself doesn't bring any Condi with it. So how do we get more value off the Longbow on this? Because when we're looking at the Longbow's kit, if we are not, trading all in on our damage, and let's go ahead and get into beast mode here at this point, we've really got two skills, okay? We've got long range shot, and we've got rapid fire. Now, we see a lot of situations in open world where your Longbow Rangers are just going around and hitting all their powers off cooldown, all their bow skills off cooldown. Let's be clear that Hunter Shot is a little bit of damage, and then gives you stealth. It's a physical projectile combo finisher, which is not always my favorite combo finisher, to be honest with you. This is not a hugely valuable skill in PvE. All right, so let's keep that in mind. Point blank shot is knockback, and we see this being used improperly all the time because people are going in with their longbow and just hitting all these powers off cooldown, but what really happens is they're going to shoot anything with that doesn't have a break bar out of position. So these three here are what are essentially situational powers, and situational does not mean every situation. It's kind of important to realize this, and I know what I'm going over here right now is probably old hat for a lot of you that are watching this video. I think though that it's important to touch on these things for players who may be a little bit newer to the game, and I think there are a significant amount of people who hop on Ranger for the class fantasy, the Longbow Ranger for the class fantasy specifically, and end up, underperforming without really understanding why, and underperforming without even understanding that they're underperforming. And I think that that's important. Barrage is another example in that this skill, does, some damage, but it's really slow. So it tags things, but overall, you're actually better off just auto-attacking. So it's not a huge amount of damage that we're actually getting off this. It's decent, but it's the kind of thing that we want to save for situations when there's AoE pressure that are needed. And we don't just want to go through here and hit all these powers off cooldown, particularly on Longbow. Let's keep that in mind. Now, we want to hit rapid fire when it's off cooldown, but let's take a really good look at what we're doing here with these numbers. Now, if I pull up rapid fire here at this point, okay, so our total there was just shy of 8,000 damage. Not bad, okay, not great. But if I go ahead at this point and I hit Quickening Zephyr and Sick 'em before I hit Rapid Fire, so we'll do that here, and then we'll hit Rapid Fire. Let's take a look at what that does to those numbers. So that's just shy of 10,000 there. That's over 20% more damage. That is a significant amount and really kind of important to start thinking about these things. So I just want to put that in front of you guys. You know, Longbow is not a weapon you should just be using and hitting all your powers off cooldown for these exact reasons. And more specifically speaking, you know, you won't be very effective. Now, if I go ahead and switch over here into my other option, okay, which is the dagger. Now, the dagger is, in addition to doing about the same amount, okay, of strike damage, also doing a bunch of condi damage. This is obviously preferable. Okay, the same thing happens here when I go into the 2. I'm going to be giving poison damage. Now that poison damage is going to give us sustain, as we were talking about. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And then if I look at the 3 on this, not only am I doing some damage, I'm getting 4.5 seconds of quickness, and it's an ammo skill that I can run twice. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, you know, the value of Longbow. Let's get into the other reason why people you know, say that Longbow is what they want to run, other than class fantasy, and we're talking about the ranged component of it. I just want to sit back and do range from a safe distance. Well, first of all, guess what? We're Soul Beast, and when we are solo, we don't have that beast tanking our aggro. I also want to put in front of you guys that Guild Wars 2's combat is not like other MMOs, where it's the, you know, where the range has the same kind of benefit that that other MMOs actually give you when hitting from range. This is the same kind of situation that you'll run in with the current, you know, discourse over Elementalist, you know, in that people just want to quote unquote sit back and do range damage. Well, you know what? Guild Wars 2 is not like that. And more specifically speaking, as I mentioned in the other Ranger video, you know, the best place to be at all points is for everybody to be stacked right in front of the boss and to be all stacked together. That's negating the value of that. So is that negating the value of your Longbow? No. What this is doing is it is putting our Longbow into a situation where we want to be using it as a utility weapon. We want to be bursting, okay, off rapid fire. We can get a little bit of hits from barrage, but obviously we want to save barrage for those situations where we are hitting more than one enemy at once and getting real value off it. And again, we want to be using these Longbow skills after we've hit Quickening Zephyr and Sikkim. So, you know, it's not as complicated as you might think, and it's not the kind of thing that you're going to be hitting on a regular basis. But if we switch back over into axes, let's take a quick look here. We can hit Axe 5. Now, Axe 5, let's look at the damage that comes off the Axe 5 real quick there. So unbuffed, that's doing a lot more damage than any of the Longbow skills were doing, okay? And that was unbuffed with barely any might. That's really important to keep in mind, all right? Is that this, you know, Whirling Defense is a much higher damage skill. And really what we want to do is start to chain these together. So what I want to be doing is I want to be over here, and we'll wait a couple of seconds until my weapon swap comes back. You know, and you know, in an ideal world, what we want to do is we want to hit Quickening Zephyr, we want to hit Sikkim, we want to go ahead and hit the and then we want to go into our Axe 5 there and take a look at the difference in the damage. In terms of the best CC you can do on this, I mentioned earlier about taking Vulture Stance off and putting Spike Trap down. This is also really good, but let's look at Entangle first. We put Entangle down, and let's look at that breakdown bar come down on its own. And that is, you know, some really significant CC. So let's keep that one in mind. At this point, let me just go ahead and drop the Spike Trap. When that goes blue, there we go. That's also a very significant amount of break bar hate right there. That's some really hard CC. Axe 4 is going to give us a little bit. It's a pull, so we also have to kind of have to target it. So we target it past our enemy, and when that comes back, that's some decent CC. I'm not going to complain about that CC. Finally, over on the Longbow, okay, we've got point blank shot. Please don't use this on enemies that don't have break bars if you're playing with other people. I understand the value of kind of pushing things away from you, but what that's going to do is drive your melee friends up the wall. But point blank shot, bam, there it is. It's a beautiful thing. So there you have it, my friends. There's Celestial Longbow Ranger for open world. Obviously not a meta build by any shake of the imagination, but what I think it should do is give you a really good starting point to maybe taking Ranger to the next level, to maybe kind of putting that longbow aside for some other, tools, and when we're using the longbow, to making sure that we're getting the most out of it at any given situation. Hope it's of use to you guys. At this point, I'm going to thank you all very much for watching and getting through this video. I am going to remind you to have fun in game, min-max your real lives, and we'll see you again in the mists.